Okay, let's dive in. Think about healthcare data. It's absolutely massive.
Huge. And so critical.
But so much of the richest patient information, the real story of someone's health, is kind of locked away.
Yep. Stuck inside all those unstructured clinical notes, doctor's progress notes, radiology reports, path reports.
All that stuff we call RWD, real-world data.
And that real-world data is gold. Seriously, it's not just about controlled clinical trials, it's what's happening with patients day to day in the real world.
Which is vital for, well, everything. Improving care, research.
Finding patients for trials, generating that real-world evidence, RWE, to see how treatments actually work outside of trials.
So the treasure's there, but it's buried in text. Getting it out, making it usable, that's medical abstraction.
Exactly. Reading those notes, pulling out the key details, cancer stage, treatments, lab results, structuring the unstructured.
And the traditional ways. That's where the problems start.
Oh, yeah. Huge amounts of manual work, either building complex rules for every single data point.
Which sounds brittle.
It is. Or if you go the machine learning route, you need armies of people annotating thousands and thousands of notes to train separate models for each piece of information.
So incredibly slow, incredibly expensive. The source mentioned, what, almost 2 million new cancer patients a year in the U.S.?
Right. And it can take hours of expert time just to abstract the key data for one patient manually.
Hours per patient. That just doesn't scale. And then there's the whole issue with guidelines changing all the time.
Uh-huh. That's a major headache. Like the AJCC Cancer Staging Manual, it's on its 8th edition now.
So the rules of the game keep changing.
Precisely. What you structured perfectly using version 7 might be inconsistent or just plain wrong. Under version 8, they call it semantic drift. Your systems, your extracted data, are constantly falling behind.
You're always playing catch-up.
Exactly. Rebuilding rules, retraining models. It's a constant cycle. And that's where large language models, LLMs, come in. They offer a potentially different way.
Okay, which brings us to the focus for this deep dive. We're looking at a new framework built for this. UME, the Udemy Abstractor.
Yep, and the idea is using these frontier LLMs like GPT-4o for what they call universal abstraction.
Universal abstraction. So our mission here is to unpack UMA. How does it actually work? How does it use LLMs to get around those old problems?
And crucially, how did it perform? They tested it on real oncology data from Providence Health System. What does that tell us about the future of structuring all this patient information?
Right. Let's dig into that problem a bit more first. We know RWD is valuable, complementing trials.
Immensely valuable. And like we said, most of it, the really rich stuff, is in text. Notes, reports. It's got the nuances, the context, the patient journey details.
Stuff you miss in structured fields. But you can't easily analyze paragraphs or match patients to trials.
Exactly. And that traditional abstraction barrier, the manual rules or labeling, you asked how big that burden is.
Yeah, really, how bad is it?
It's enormous. Think about creating specific if-then logic just to find, say, an ECOG performance status, and a whole new set for Karnofsky status, then another for tumor histology.
Or the labeling alternative.
Even worse, maybe. Getting clinical experts to read thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of notes just to tag examples of one thing, like performance status. Repeat for histology. Repeat for treatment dates. Those hours per patient really add up across millions. It's just not feasible for large-scale, timely abstraction.
Yeah, and the evolving guidelines just pour salt in the wound.
Totally. You spend months, years building your version 7 extractor, and boom, version 8 lands, maybe changing what a T1 tumor means.
Your old data is suddenly inconsistent.
Or needs complete reabstraction. Your methods need constant, costly updates.
Okay, so the picture's clear. Manual, slow, expensive, breaks easily with updates. How does UMA, this universal abstraction idea with LLMs, try to solve this?
The key is its zero-shot approach. This is the potential game changer.
Zero shot, meaning?
Meaning it doesn't need those huge, specific, hand-labeled training data sets for every single attribute you want. You don't need a performance status data set, a PDL1 data set, a treatment response data set.
It just knows what to look for based on the LLM's general knowledge.
Pretty much. You tell it what you want, define it well, and the LLM uses its pre-trained understanding of language and, to some extent, the medical domain to find it.
And universal abstraction. That's the goal, right? Making it scalable.
Scalable and adaptable. Scalable to add new data points quickly. Adaptable to handle changing guidelines without massive retraining. Adaptable to new patients, new data sets. Instead of building, dozens of little specialized tools.
Like figure one in the source might suggest conceptually.
Right. Instead of that, UMA is designed as one flexible framework. You configure it, and the LLM does the work.
So one core system. And the heart of it is this prompt template, a set of instructions for the LLM.
Exactly. It's modular, customizable. Think of it like a recipe you give the LLM. It has a few main parts, like you see in Figure 2. Some standard stuff first.
Like defining the role. You're an AI assistant for medical abstraction and setting the general task, treating it like finding events and their details.
Yep, the basic setup. Then the core part, the task-specific configurations. This is where the user defines what to pull out for each attribute.
Say performance status.
Right. You define what it means and then specify the key details, the descriptors you want. So for performance status, you'd want descriptors like measurement type, is it ECOG or KPS, and value the actual score.
Makes sense. And they mentioned you can add other descriptors too, like date, certainty.
Date found, certainty level, the actual text snippet, the evidence, and even the model's reasoning.
Why add those? Just for human checking later.
That's part of it. Definitely helps with review and trust. But here's something really interesting they found. Including descriptors like evidence and reasoning actually seems to improve the LLM's extraction accuracy.
Wait, asking it to explain how it found the answer makes the answer better.
It seems so. Especially for complex tasks. It's like forcing the LLM to show its work, to ground its answer in the text. It acts a bit like chain of thought prompting.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So better accuracy and more interpretable. And the output format is standardized.
Yes. Clean JSON. Usually a list, and each item in the list is one time the attribute was found with all the descriptors you asked for, readier for computers to use.
Okay, but what about that classic LLM problem, the context window limit? Guidelines are huge, patient histories can be super long. How does UMA deal with inputs that are just too big?
Good question. That's critical, especially for long context things like cancer staging. You can't just stuff a 600-page manual or 50 patient notes into the prompt.
So what's the workaround?
UMA uses LLMs for pre-processing too, as shown in Figure 4. For guidelines, it uses something like GPT-4 to summarize the relevant parts of the guideline before that summary goes into the main UMA prompt.
Ah, okay. The LLM digests the reference material first. Smart. What about the patient history? Same idea.
Similar idea, yeah. For those tasks needing info across many notes, UMA uses an LLM to create an attribute-specific summary of the patient history first. So it pulls out the bits relevant to, say, staging from across all the notes.
And they found this summarization didn't just save tokens or fit things in.
Right. Another really interesting finding from their ablation studies, summarizing the history, even when it technically could fit, often improved the extraction performance.
Improved it? Why would removing information help?
The likely reason is noise reduction. Clinical histories can be long and rambling. The summary filters out the irrelevant stuff, letting the main LLM focus on the signal, the information that actually matters for that specific extraction task. Less noise, better focus.
Makes sense. Clean up the input for the AI. Can it also use existing structured data?
Yes, that's another feature. Optionally, you can feed it structured data you already have, like if you know the treatment start date, you can include that when asking for clinical staging, which needs info before treatment. They call this prompt chaining, using outputs or knowns to guide the next step, also shown in Figure 4.
Okay, so a very flexible prompt system using the LLM for extraction and smart preprocessing like summarization. What happens after the LLM spits out the JSON? Is it ready to use then?
Not quite. There's usually a post-processing pipeline. The raw JSON needs some refinement. Well, filtering based on descriptors, maybe you only want treatment events that mention chemotherapy, for instance. Then standardization is crucial.
Mapping all the different ways doctors write things to standard codes.
Exactly. Mapping extracted values to medical ontologies, ICD-10, NCI thesaurus, gene names using HGNC, variants using HGVS, whatever is appropriate, making it consistent. They mention using things like synonym lists and string matching.
And getting rid of duplicates. Same info mentioned twice.
Yep. Deduplication. Merging redundant entries found within a note or across notes if the values and dates are very similar. The end goal is clean, structured data linked to the patient, maybe with timestamps to build a timeline.
Got it. So that's the UMA framework in theory. How did it actually do in practice? They used real oncology data.
Yeah, from Providence Health System. They picked 15 representative oncology attributes, things you'd really not for research or clinical decision support, and they grouped them
Into short context and long context.
Right. Short context are things usually found in a single note, like PDL-1 results, ECOG or KPS performance status, specific treatments, mentions of response or progression, or just confirming a cancer case finding. Figure 3 gives examples.
And long context needs more digging. Across notes, using guidelines.
Exactly. Primarily the detailed cancer staging elements. Primary site, histology, and then the clinical and pathologic T, N, and M stages. These often require piecing together info over time and applying complex rules. Think Figure 4.
And the data was real-world messy, PDFs sometimes.
Yep, real clinical notes, different types converted to text. The exact number of notes or patients varied a bit depending on which attribute they were testing and what human-verified ground truth data they had available for comparison. Table 1 has the specifics.
Which LLMs did they test UMA with? You mentioned GPT-4o.
Primarily the frontier models, GPT-4 and GPT-4, because the zero-shot approach really relies on the power of the underlying model. But they also showed results using others like Llama 2, Mixtral, GPT 3.5, UMA worked just not quite as well.
And importantly, UMA was zero-shot for all of them. No specific training.
Correct. Zero task-specific training labels or rules were used for UMA with any LLM.
What did they compare it against? The baselines.
Traditional methods. Where they had enough labeled data, they used supervised BERT models, state-of-the-art fine-tuned models. Where they didn't have labels, they used heuristic rule-based methods. For the cancer staging baseline, that supervised model was specifically trained on data from the same source using standard codes.
Okay, the moment of truth. Results time. How did zero-shot UMA with GPT-4o handle the short context tasks? Table 3 results.
Pretty well. Overall, UMA with GPT-4o came out on top, averaging about a 2 F1 point improvement over the best baseline.
F1, that's balancing finding the right stuff and finding it correctly.
Exactly. Precision and recall.
Yeah.
And UMA's edge came mostly from finding more of the relevant information better at recall.
Any specific wins?
Yeah. For PDL1 and performance status, UMA with GPT-4o basically hit the ceiling, near perfect scores. For most other tasks, it matched or beat the baselines.
But not all.
The one exception was case finding. The supervised baseline was significantly better there, but it had a massive training data set, tens of thousands of labeled examples. So that highlights the data hunger of traditional methods.
Okay, so UMA is competitive or better, even with zero labels, unless the baseline has tons and tons of data. How did the choice of LLM matter within UMA?
Big difference. The results clearly showed UMA performs much better with the top-tier models like GPT-4o and GPT-4 compared to the others like Llama 2 or GPT 3.5. It really leverages the capabilities of the underlying LLM.
Makes sense. Now, the really challenging part, the long context cancer staging tasks, Table 4. Reasoning over time, applying guidelines. How did zero-shot UMA do against a supervised model here?
This was the really striking result. On average, across all the staging attributes, zero-shot UMA with GPT-4o achieved a 2 absolute point improvement in accuracy over the supervised baseline.
Wow, zero-shot beating supervised on average for complex tasks. That's impressive.
It really is. And there was one standout result within that.
Which one?
Pathologic T staging. This is about staging based on surgical findings, often complex. UMA with GPT-4o showed a massive 20 absolute point improvement in accuracy over the supervised model.
20 points. On Path T, what does that suggest?
It suggests UMA, powered by GPT-4o, was much better at synthesizing information from potentially multiple pathology reports and correctly applying the very specific, often complex AJCC rules for T-staging after surgery compared to the supervised model trained on similar data.
That's a huge indicator of its reasoning ability. How about the other staging parts?
Performance was closer there. Sometimes UMA was a bit better. Sometimes the supervised baseline still had an edge, particularly on things like the fine-grained primary site, histology, and clinical T-staging. But that overall average win and the massive PAF-T gain for a zero-shot method is really the headline.
Definitely. It shows the potential for these complex, multi-step reasoning tasks. So UMA works, but why does it work? What makes the difference? That's where the ablation studies come in. Table 5.
Exactly. They took parts away to see what happened. They looked at summarization and those extra descriptors, evidence and reasoning.
And the summarization finding was counterintuitive.
Yeah. They found that summarizing the patient notes first still improved performance, even when the original notes weren't technically too long for the LLM's context window.
So it wasn't just about fitting it in.
Nope. It seems that noise reduction aspect is key. Filtering the input helps the LLM focus and perform better, especially on complex clinical text.
And what about asking for evidence and reasoning? Just nice to haves.
Not at all. Removing those descriptors actually hurt performance. The drop was even bigger for more complex tasks, like the breast cancer staging examples they showed.
Why?
The thinking is these act like a built-in chain of thought. Forcing the LLM to identify the evidence and explain its reasoning helps it structure its thinking process, ground its answer, and ultimately arrive at a more accurate extraction, especially for complex tasks needing guideline interpretation.
So making the AI show its work makes its work better. Powerful stuff. Okay, let's wrap up. What's the big picture potential here, and what are the caveats or limitations?
The potential is really about speed and scale. Onboarding a new attribute with UMA is potentially orders of magnitude faster, instead of months or years for labeling or rule writing.
It's mostly defining the prompt template. Days, maybe?
Exactly. That's a huge accelerator. And adaptability is key, too. New guidelines come out, you update the prompt, maybe add the new guideline summary. Much easier than retraining or rewriting.
You could even handle multiple versions.
Potentially, yeah. Based on the date of the note, you could tell UMA which version of the guideline summary to use. Crucial for managing historical data.
And how does it fit into actual clinical workflows? Human review is still needed, right?
Oh, absolutely. But UMA is designed to support that review. By providing the summary it used, the reasoning steps, the evidence snippets, it gives the human expert everything they need to verify the result much, much faster. It's AI-assisted review, not full automation.
And the summarization helps with ongoing updates, too.
Right. New notes come in for a patient. You just summarize the new stuff, update the history summary, and efficiently rerun the extraction for longitudinal tracking without reprocessing everything from scratch. Saves time and cost.
Okay, huge potential for efficiency. What are the limitations they pointed out?
A big one is data completeness. This study used data from one health system. Patients move around.
So the history might be incomplete, missing treatments or diagnoses from elsewhere.
Exactly. If key information happened outside the Providence system, UMA wouldn't see it, potentially leading to errors. Integrating data across systems is needed for a truly complete picture.
Makes sense. Any limits to the UMA method itself?
They acknowledge this is a strong proof of concept using fairly standard prompting. They didn't dive into more advanced techniques like getting the LLM to check its own work, self-verification, or using few-shot examples in the prompt. These could potentially push performance even higher.
So room for improvement, but already very strong results with the current approach.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's boil it down. UMA shows we can use these powerful LLMs for zero-shot medical abstraction. It gets around the huge manual effort of traditional methods.
And it performs really well, matching or beating baselines on simpler tasks, and significantly outperforming even supervised methods on average for complex cancer staging, with that huge 20-point gain on Path T.
The big wins are efficiency, scalability, adding new things fast, and adaptability to changing guidelines, all without needing those massive labeled data sets.
It's a potential solution to finally unlock the value trapped in all that unstructured real-world data.
Which could really change things. Faster research, better treatment decisions, quicker clinical trial matching. It feels like it could really accelerate progress.
It definitely could. And it brings up a fascinating point to consider.
Go on.
This UMA approach, it doesn't just give you an answer, it gives you the reasoning, the evidence it used, specifically to help a human expert quickly check the work. So you have this blend, AI doing the heavy lifting super fast, and humans verifying rapidly using the AI's own trail.
So the provocative thought is,
What does that blended future really look like in practice? How does it change the role of the human expert when they're working with AI that can explain itself? And how quickly might that change the daily grind of managing and using clinical data? Definitely something for you to think about.